Let's bring in Sarah Larson-Levy. She's co-founder and CEO of Y7. Good to have you here.
Thank you guys so much for having me.
You're disrupting the yoga industry. How?
We do things pretty differently. What really frustrated me about the yoga practice was that I really felt a barrier to entry. The space was created for people who thought that maybe yoga wasn't for them, and I was one of those people. We practice in a dark, heated, candlelit room, and we use the beat of the music to drive the breath and the pace of class. So you're constantly moving, and there's always something different every time you go.
And you're getting a lot of pickup. How many studios do you have? I tell you started with how many, and now you're how many?
I started with a small pop-up in Brooklyn about 5 years ago, and now we have 10 studios in Manhattan and 2 on the West Coast in Los Angeles.
So as promised, this week's episode is why I feel as though hip-hop yoga is not real yoga. And I'm really excited to be doing this. Please make sure you subscribe if you're on YouTube. Please follow the podcast, Apple Podcasts and Spotify, so you're notified for the next episode. So I'm really excited to be doing this. I have a lot of emotions about this because I'm not really that keen on this topic. So please excuse me if I have extra pauses. That is the reason why. I don't want to really edit it too much because I feel as though the more authentic I am, the better it is to cover these topics. Now I want to start off by saying I am covering a particular yoga studio because I feel as though they are the most known for hip-hop yoga. That's what their trend is. So it's nothing against them as a studio, as a franchise, whatever they are, because they have branched off. I'm not sure if they are particularly a franchise, but they have branched off, have different locations around the USA, and it kind of gives me like Soul Cycle vibes that I get from this yoga studio. But the yoga studio that I am going to be covering in my examples of why I believe yoga, hip-hop yoga is not real yoga, is Y7. So I don't really want to go into that much depth like I did with Soul Cycle about it, because this is just an example. It's not about Y7 per se. I have had an interaction with the owner. Maybe one day I'll speak about it. I just don't want to live in the past too much. So I just want to tell you that I have had an interaction with one of the owners. He was not the nicest person. I've had 2 interactions actually. One of them was me auditioning as a teacher. The other one was him trying to get me to do a write-up for his new venture. So I just want to be transparent about that. The only reason why I'm using this example, like I said, is because it is the most well-known hip-hop yoga studio. I did take a few classes through the audition process at Y7, and this was 5 years ago, so it has changed from what I can see through social media. Something that was very prevalent when I did practice, I took a class at Union Square in New York City. I also took class Upper East Side. But something that I noticed when I practiced there was that it was it appeared to me like culture appropriation. And I don't usually like to throw that word around. I feel like people throw it around too much. And sometimes when I hear people say, oh, a particular style of dress is culture appropriation, I don't agree with that. But I am huge on respecting other people's culture. And that's why last week I covered how I feel as though we should no longer be calling yoga in the West still yoga, because most yoga studios don't adhere to the practice, the fundamentals and traditions of yoga. So I did a little polling on my Instagram to see if people wanted to hear about this topic, and I got a lot of requests, actually 100% requests to hear about this topic. And that's why I'm very excited to be talking about this with you, because I feel as though it's important. So let's go back to when I went to the yoga studio. I felt cultural appropriation. I felt as though there was an adoption of yoga that wasn't really being implemented. I also felt as though there was the adoption of hip-hop. And when I was going through some Yelp reviews about Y7, somebody else agreed with me, and I was like, wow. Because somebody wrote, I feel as though they're using black pain. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with hip-hop culture. I love hip-hop. I basically grew up on hip-hop culture, especially being from New York. And it does feel, when I first walked into the studio, it felt very contrived and like it was being adopted for purpose. And if you know anything about hip-hop culture, it was immersed. It became a culture because of poetry, because of things that people were going through, in the 80s, the 70s, late 70s, throughout the 80s, and then it became, I would say, really popular in the 90s. So to hear people talk about, there's hip-hop yoga, the sound of it was the impression that I got when I walked into the studio 5 years ago. So fast forward to when I'm doing my research on this, and it seems as though they've taken some of the critique, the general critique I've given, other people have given, and it seems as though they've added other teachers of color. When I went in there 5 years ago, there were no teachers of color on the roster sheet for teachers. And not to say that they have to. I'm not the kind of person that says, if you are a business, you have to have people of color. That's not how I approach life. That's not what I believe. But I do believe if you are going to adopt a culture and not represent that culture, that is appropriation. So fast forward to today, where I'm doing research for the podcast that's about to air, that you're listening to right now, and I noticed that there's actually a ton of teachers of color, which sounds great, sounds amazing, but why did it have to take backlash to make that happen? And why is it still being called hip-hop yoga? And clearly the owners themselves are not people of color. And I'm not saying that they have to be, but to me, it still remains that it is cultural appropriation. So when you see the owner speak about, I've watched a few interviews because I've been doing research for this, but you see the owner speak about particularly Sarah. She's the wife, to her husband, Mason, I believe his name is. That's the one that I met and had 2 exchanges with. When you see her speak about yoga, it doesn't imply to me what yoga is, the union between mind and body. It seems, and this is my opinion, it seems very fitness based, which I believe yoga not to be. And that's why I think that yoga should not be called yoga, because it's not fitness. It can be in the West a form of wellness, but asana, the postures, is about the body. The other 7 components, I believe, are lacking.
We are a tribe called Sweat. Free flowing, sweat dripping, beat bumping. We welcome all who give their all. One family formed by sweat. Sweat is our sacrifice. Sweat doesn't judge. Sweat is cash money, and we earn every drop together.
So as a yoga teacher, something so important to me is alignment. And I think that a lot of the time students get injured, yes, because of themselves, but also because they're not being guided well. And when I did take class 5 years ago, I thought, oh my gosh, this is automatically a recipe for disaster. You're in the dark, and if you don't do things well, then you can't really call out for help. That's how I felt taking class. So when I used to take class at another studio, and it was candlelit, it was at night, I felt as though because it was candlelit, I could notice other people, because I've been practicing for a while. I'm not saying I'm a brilliant practitioner. I don't believe there is that word in yoga. But I did notice that some people needed help. This is another yoga studio. Some people needed help and the yoga teacher couldn't even see them. And I got the same vibe when I was taking class at Y7. I felt as though if I needed anything, I wouldn't have been able to be seen, or if I'd hurt myself, I wasn't given the space to acknowledge that it might have been me. And you'll see a lot of the yoga students are very flexible, they're almost advanced level yoga, and that's perfectly fine, they can be. But if I weren't a yoga teacher and had to be practicing for a long time, I would kind of feel intimidated. So I completely contradict what I have heard one of the owners say, that she felt as though it wasn't inviting. In fact, I feel as though walking into a space like Y7, I would feel turned off and intimidated by the level of yoga, which seems advanced, and the fact that it's in the dark and nobody would really help me. I think inviting spaces are open, they're generally well lit, and there's a form of natural lighting that seems to me inviting. Now, if you don't have that same stance, opinion, that's totally fine. That's just my stance as being a yoga student and a teacher for many years.
Well, a little taste of what Y7 is.
So Y7 is sweat dripping, beat bumping, candlelit yoga.
Ooh, that's awesome. What's the mission of your company?
Y7's mission is to break down the barriers to traditional yoga, making it inclusive and accessible for everybody.
So to me, hip-hop yoga is a complete red flag when it comes to safety. And I totally understand if it's on a bike. I mean, like I've said previously in the past podcast, I've loved going to Soul Cycle. Not so much recently, but definitely in the past. I love that it's in the dark. But I think the big difference between cycling in the dark and doing yoga in the dark is that you can't really slip off your bike. It's very hard to do that, and it's hard for a reason. But with yoga mats, you can slip, you can fall. And if it's in the dark, who is there to really take care of you and to make you feel as though you're not an idiot for slipping on your own sweat? So that's safety concern number one. I also feel like I've seen also in Yelp reviews when I went, and this was 5 years ago, maybe they've changed. Also with social distancing, they've probably changed. So I will give that open space for them to grow. If they have grown, I commend them. But something that I critiqued was that the spaces were so close between that it felt almost like very jam-packed. And I get the idea. I mean, I know that in the dark, people tend to feel less shame, people tend to feel less judgment. I totally understand. But in this instance, the safety concern overrides physicality and that feeling of not feeling judged or somebody harshly critiquing them because of their body and how they feel. And I also find it very interesting when you look at the social media and all of this and a lot of the reviews. It's often by people that are definitely well advanced in yoga, also very fit. I've also noticed that. So if it is people who are fit and well advanced in yoga, it kind of contradicts the whole idea of not feeling shame in the dark. So, in conclusion, I just want to reiterate that I don't have anything against any yoga studio. That's not the point of my podcast. My podcast is about bringing to light people that have not necessarily had a chance to say things coming from a yoga teacher perspective, I want to create a space that if somebody feels excluded, if somebody feels like they aren't worthy in a yoga space, like I have felt many times, including at Y7, I've definitely felt that it's okay to speak about it. Because I think that there's been this culture of, if I speak about a yoga teacher, if I speak about a yoga studio, if I speak about a place that I wasn't welcomed and everybody else is, I am ungrateful, or there's something wrong with me. And I want to help rid us of that culture, because it contradicts wellness. And that's where I came up with the name unwellness. It might not be socially PC or socially accepted to say, hey, I felt harassed here, or hey, I felt excluded, or hey, I feel like that's cultural appropriation, or hey, I don't feel comfortable practicing in a jam-packed yoga studio. But it's an opinion, and I think it's very imperative that we get back to creating open dialogue about our experiences in the wellness community, and that includes positive and negative. So I don't believe hip-hop yoga is real yoga, because I think it has taken two elements that are popular and decided to lump them together. I don't think that the owner's intentions are genuine, and that is up for debate, but I am allowed to my opinion. I also feel as though it seems very market driven, very pushed. I mean, the fitness and yoga, like I said, is not fitness, it's wellness. It makes up an aspect of wellness. Yoga is a union, and how much of a union can one have if they have loud music, if they are in a dark space, if they don't feel like they can practice and feel seen, heard, and validated? Please stay tuned for next week. I'm really excited for another fun episode that's coming up. I'd also love to hear what you have to say, so please write a review. I prefer 5-star, but whatever you have to say, I'm open to that too. I would love to hear what you have to say on YouTube, so if you want to write a comment, please comment below. And yeah, I really am so grateful for the community that we've built. We're growing, and I'm very grateful for that. So thank you.